September 6, 1976, 1845 hours local time, Chuguyevka Air Base, Soviet Far East. The Siberian twilight bled from grey to deep indigo. On the concrete apron of the 530th Fighter Aviation Regiment, ground crews moved with the weary precision of the day's final checks. The cold metallic scent of jet fuel and damp concrete hung in the air. Among the rows of sleek interceptors, one machine stood apart. It was not sleek, it was brutal, a monument of steel and ambition. Its colossal twin intakes, like gaping mouths, flanked a needle-nose radome. Its vast, trapezoidal wings were forged not for elegance, but to hold the machine aloft at the edge of space. This was Article 84, Blue 31, the Soviet Union's most formidable aerial shield, a secret wrapped in steel. Its pilot, Near Lieutenant Viktor Belenko, 29, gave his aircraft a final routine walk-around. His movements were calm, methodical. To the watching crew chief, he was just another elite pilot, a star shiner of the VVS, preparing for a routine navigation and intercept drill. The mission paperwork was in order. The air was clear. At 1848, the Tumansky R-15B 300 turbojets ignited with a deafening, earth-shaking roar. Blue flames choked into shimmering heat haze. Belenko taxied. At the runway threshold he paused. A moment of stillness, the cockpit a sealed capsule of light and gauges in the gathering dark. Then full military power. The Foxbat hurled itself down the tarmac, a 36-ton projectile, and unstuck from the earth, its silhouette melting into the vastness of the sky to the east. In the regimental command bunker, radar scopes painted his green blip. Course normal, speed normal, altitude normal, another training sortie in the defense of the motherland. But Viktor Belenko was not following the flight plan. He was descending, leveling off at a mere 150 feet, skimming the wrinkled skin of the Sea of Japan. The radar blip faded into ground clutter, then vanished entirely. In the bunker, a faint unease stirred, then settled. A temporary glitch. The Foxbat, and the man trusted to fly it, were simply too valuable, too secure to ever be lost. They were already gone. The defection of Viktor Belenko was not a random act of opportunity. It was a singular event detonated at the precise intersection of two opposing forces, the paranoid, technologically driven militarism of the late Cold War, and the profound, corrosive disillusionment festering within the Soviet system itself. To understand the magnitude of the shock, one must first understand the sanctity of the machine he stole, and the suffocating world from which he fled. The year is 1976. The Cold War is deep in its strategic stalemate phase, defined by the grim theology of mutually assured destruction. But above the nuclear triad, a more immediate daily duel is fought in the skies. The United States possesses one weapon that embodies both supreme technological arrogance and a deep strategic threat to the USSR, the SR-71 Blackbird. Lockheed's creation is not merely an aircraft, it is a statement. 3, above 85,000 feet, invulnerable to interception and immune to missiles of the era, it skims the edge of space, its cameras peeling back the Iron Curtain with impunity, mapping missile silos, listening to communications, demonstrating a chilling technological supremacy. For the Soviet High Command and the Politburo, the SR-71 is a daily humiliation, a spectral violation of their sovereign airspace. Their surface-to-air missiles fruitlessly chase its heat signature. Their fastest interceptors, like the MiG-21, can only stare upwards as the Blackbird's twin contrails etch a mocking signature across the heavens. The Soviet response to this provocation was not incremental. It was a hysterical, all-or-nothing engineering panic attack. In the late 50s, the directive from the Kremlin was absolute: create an interceptor that can catch and kill the high-altitude, high-speed threats represented by the projected American B-70 Valkyrie bomber and ultimately the SR-70. The design bureaus of Artem Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich were given a blank check and a draconian mandate. The result, first flown in 1964, was the MiG-25. The Foxbat was a machine built not for finesse, but for sheer terrifying performance. It was engineered around two enormous Tumansky R-15 turbojets, the most powerful ever fitted to a fighter, and a massive RP-25 Smerch A radar, known to NATO as Foxfire, so potent it could reportedly cook a rabbit at a kilometre. 8+ flight, its airframe was constructed primarily of nickel-steel alloy, not lightweight titanium, It was heavy, brutish, and fuel-thirsty. It sacrificed everything, maneuverability, range, subtlety, on the altar of speed and altitude. When it was unveiled to the world at the Moscow Aviation Institute in 1967, Western attaches were stunned. Its size, its wing shape, its sheer implied performance sent NATO into a years-long panic, spurring the development of the F-15 Eagle. What they did not know was that the MiG-25 was a glass cannon, a breathtakingly fast high-altitude specialist, but one with severe limitations in a dogfight. Limitations the USSR guarded as fiercely as its capabilities. For the West, the Foxbat became the ultimate intelligence prize. Satellites photographed it. Signals intelligence probed its radar emissions. Analysts constructed elaborate theories about its composition and capabilities, but it remained an enigma, a steel ghost haunting NATO war plans. No MiG-25 had ever been outside the Soviet bloc. No Western pilot had ever seen one up close. Its secrets, the true limits of its radar, the composition of its airframe, the performance curves of its engines, the electronic fingerprints of its IFF, identification friend or foe systems and countermeasures were locked away behind layers of obsessive security. To possess one would be to crack open the Kremlin's most prized aerospace vault. This priceless asset was entrusted to a select group of men, the pilots of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, the Vojska PVO. These were not ordinary airmen. They were the guardians of the motherland's aerial ramparts, subjected to intense political scrutiny and KGB vetting. Their loyalty was considered absolute, their ideological purity paramount. They lived on remote, high-security bases like Chuguyevka in Primorsky Krai, a windswept, isolated posting within striking distance of Japan, but a world away from the comforts and freedoms of the West. Their lives were a regimented cycle of training, political instruction, and confinement. For a man like Viktor Belenko, this world was not an honour. It was a gilded cage, and the MiG-25 was its most elaborate lock. The world of the PVO pilot was a paradox of immense privilege and profound confinement. He wielded a multi-million ruble national treasure, but his own life was micromanaged by the state. Viktor Ivanovich Belenko was a product of this system, and its perfect betrayer. Born in 1947 in Nalchik in the Caucasus, Belenko's early life was marked by post-war Soviet scarcity. His path was classic for a talented, ambitious young man within the system. Secondary school, then the Armavir Higher Military Aviation School for pilots. He excelled, he was intelligent, a skilled aviator, and outwardly demonstrated the required political conformity. His selection for training on the MiG-25 was a mark of supreme trust. Only the most reliable, technically proficient pilots were chosen. The aircraft was so complex and temperamental that a significant portion of training was conducted in classrooms and simulators before a pilot ever touched the controls of the real jet. Belenko mastered it. He became an instructor pilot himself, responsible for teaching others to fly the formidable Foxbat. But beneath the surface of the model officer, a deep disillusionment on what was calcifying. In his later testimonies, Belenko would describe a growing, gnawing awareness of the gap between the state's propaganda and the reality he perceived. He saw the economic stagnation, the shoddy consumer goods, the empty promises. As an educated engineer pilot, he had access to restricted technical journals and could infer Western technological progress, which stood in stark contrast to the clunky, inefficient Soviet reality he inhabited. The political lectures on the inevitable triumph of socialism rang hollow. His personal life added pressure. He was in a strained marriage, and the bleak, isolated life at Chuguyevka, a base surrounded by barbed wire, with poor housing and little for families to do, offered no respite. Most critically, Belenko was a man of curious, logical intellect trapped in a system that despised independent thought. He began to question everything. He later stated that he became obsessed with understanding the other side, the vibrant, technologically advanced world portrayed in forbidden Western broadcasts he risked listening to. The idea of defection did not emerge as a sudden fantasy, but as a calculated, if desperate, solution to an existential trap. He was not fleeing to a life of luxury, he was fleeing to a life of intellectual freedom. The MiG-25 was not just an aircraft to him, it was his only viable passport. It was the only thing of immense value he possessed that could guarantee his asylum would be accepted, that he would not be simply ignored or traded back in a diplomatic spat. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Sea of Japan, the stage was unwittingly being set. Japan, a key US ally, housed major American military bases at Misawa, Yokota, and Kadena on Okinawa. Its self-defense forces, though constrained by post-war constitution, maintained a vigilant air defense network. The northern island of Hokkaido was particularly sensitive, a frontline listening post against Soviet aerial activity. The Japanese and their American intelligence communities had long hungered for a close encounter with a Foxbat. They knew its general performance enveloped from radar tracks, but the details were maddeningly elusive. Pilots of the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, JASDF, trained to intercept Soviet intruders, but the MiG-25 existed mostly as a blip on a screen, a fast-moving legend. The geopolitical tension was palpable. Soviet aircraft frequently probed Japanese airspace, testing reaction times and radar coverage. Each incursion triggered a scramble of JASDF F-4 Phantoms or F-104 starfighters, a dangerous game of aerial chicken over the cold waters of the Tsushima Strait and the Sea of Japan. The rules of engagement were tense, the margins for error thin. For a lone defecting Soviet pilot, navigating this gauntlet would require not just superb flying skill, but an almost preternatural awareness of where the deadly serious game ended and a potential welcome began. He would have to avoid being shot down by his own side for deviation, and then avoid being shot down by the side he was trying to reach, all while flying an unfamiliar, fuel-guzzling route in a machine never designed in for low-level penetration. By September 1976, these two converging vectors, a disillusioned pilot and an insatiable intelligence target, were aligned. The Soviet security apparatus, confident in its layers of ideological and physical control, slumbered. The KGB's concerns were focused on external threats and internal dissidents, not on the hearts and minds of their most elite, trusted warriors. It was a fatal blind spot. In the cockpit of Blue 31, Viktor Belenko was no longer a guardian of the state. He had become a one-man precision weapon aimed directly at the heart of its most cherished secrets. Viktor Belenko defies the simple caricature of the defector. He was neither a flamboyant dissident loudly protesting tyranny, nor a mercenary seeking pure material gain. He was something arguably more dangerous to the Soviet system, a rational, technically minded idealist whose faith in the state had been eroded by its own failures. Psychologically, Belenko was a meticulous planner, his mind operating with the precision of an engineer. The defection was not an impulsive, desperate gamble. Evidence suggests he contemplated it for over a year. He began studying English in secret. He pored over available maps, calculating fuel consumption rates for the MiG-25 at different altitudes and power settings, knowing the Foxbat's notorious thirst could be his executioner. He analysed JASDF interception procedures from Soviet intelligence briefings, trying to predict how Japanese Phantoms would react to a lone, fast-moving blip coming in low and fast from the north. He even considered the weather patterns of the Sea of Japan in early September. His motives were a complex alloy of push and pull. The push was the suffocating reality of Soviet life, the ideological hypocrisy, the economic decay he saw even within the privileged military, the grim future he faced in the remote outpost of Chuguyevka. The pull was an intellectual curiosity about the West, a belief, bolstered by smuggled literature and radio broadcasts, that a society based on different principles could offer not just material comfort, but intellectual freedom. This was a moral and existential calculation, not a political one in the traditional sense. He was not swapping one ideology for another. He was fleeing ideology itself for empiricism. The immense trust placed in him by the state made his betrayal so devastating. He was a senior lieutenant, an instructor, a starshina. The KGB's Internal Security Directorate, the third chief directorate, responsible for the military, would have conducted regular background checks. His personnel file would have been clean, his political reliability assured by his unit's Zampolit, political officer. He had access to the innermost technical manuals of the MiG-25, its emergency procedures, its weaknesses. He knew the daily routines of the base, the radar coverage gaps, the communication frequencies and code words. He was not just stealing an aircraft, he was downloading the entire operational and security protocol of a top-tier PVO regiment and physically transporting it out of the country. His very normalcy was his ultimate camouflage, making the system's subsequent horror not just about the loss of a machine, but about the terrifying realization that their most perfect human components could be fundamentally corrupted from within. To grasp the scale of Belenko's act, one must see the MiG-25 not as mere hardware, but as a national icon and a psychological weapon. In the Soviet hierarchy of secrets, it sat at the apex. Its development, codenamed Izdelie 84, Product 84, was a crash program of almost mythical proportions. Confronted with the XB-70 and SR-71 threats, Soviet engineers made radical choices. Lacking widespread titanium welding expertise, they built the airframe from S&IS high-temperature nickel steel, using heavy riveting. This made the Foxbat enormously heavy, over 40 tons at takeoff, but capable of withstanding the 300 degrees Celsius temperatures of sustained Mach 3 flight. Its two Tumansky R-15 B300 engines were simple, powerful and brutal, gulping fuel but producing over 22,000 pounds of thrust each with afterburner. Its wings, large and relatively straight, provided the lift needed at extreme altitude, but rendered the aircraft a sluggish, unstable beast at lower speeds. For the West, the MiG-25's mystery bred fear and speculation. When it set absolute world records for speed and altitude in the early 70s, NATO planners were sent into a frenzy. Intelligence assessments, based largely on grainy satellite photos and the sheer size of the aircraft, inflated its capabilities. It was believed to be a highly agile, super-advanced air superiority fighter, a direct and superior counterpart to the F-15 still in development. This misapprehension cost the United States billions in design overhauls and tactical rethinking. The truth, which the Soviets guarded fanatically, was more nuanced. The Foxbat was a dedicated interceptor, a spectacularly fast and high-flying missile truck. Its massive Smerch radar, while powerful, used old-fashioned vacuum tube technology, making it heavy and less reliable than emerging Western solid-state systems. Its missiles, the R-40, were long-range, radar-guided weapons designed to hit large, non-maneuvering targets like bombers. In a close-in dogfight against a nimble F-4 or future F-15, the heavy MiG-25 would be at a severe disadvantage. This disparity between perception and reality was the Kremlin's greatest asset. The mere fear of the Foxbat projected power. Belenko's defection threatened to collapse this carefully cultivated myth, exposing the machine's true strengths and, more damagingly, its critical vulnerabilities. He was delivering not just a plane, but the cryptographic key to a decade of Soviet strategic bluff. The Soviet military security apparatus in Chapter 6 was a labyrinth of overlapping controls, designed to be impervious to exactly the kind of betrayal Viktor Belenko executed. Its subsequent failure was not due to a lack of mechanisms, but to a fatal blindness bred by absolute confidence. At the heart of control was the KGB's Third Chief Directorate, with officers embedded at every level of the armed forces. Their network of informants, the Sekretnie Sotrudniki, secret collaborators, was vast. Any sign of political deviation, foreign contacts or unusual behaviour was to be reported. Alongside them stood the military counterintelligence, OSNAS units and the ever-present Zampolit, the political officer assigned to every squadron. The Zampolit was responsible for ideological purity, morale, and ensuring the party's will superseded mere military command. He conducted weekly political education sessions, monitored personal lives, and had the power to derail a career. Physical security was equally stringent. Bases like Chuguyevka were isolated enclaves surrounded by perimeter fences, guard towers and patrols. Access to flight lines was strictly controlled. The MiG-25 itself was a classified object. Specific components, like the radar's core processor and IFF cryptographic units, were under separate seal and guard. Pilots were never given full technical schematics. They were trained on a need-to-know basis. Flight plans were filed and approved by command, with deviations requiring immediate radio justification. Airspace was monitored by a vast integrated network of ground-controlled intercept GCI radars. A pilot going off course would be challenged, then tracked, and if hostile intent was suspected, orders to engage could be given. Yet this fortress had cracks. The system was designed to catch the overtly disloyal, the drunkard, the grumbler. It was less equipped to identify the quiet, competent dissembler. Belenko's excellence was his shield. As an instructor, his dedication was unquestioned. His technical inquiries could be framed as professional diligence. The profound personal disillusionment festered internally, invisible to the checklist mentality of the security organs. Furthermore, the system suffered from a rigid, bureaucratic hubris. The concept that a top PVO pilot, a man who had sworn oaths, enjoyed significant privilege, and held the keys to the kingdom, would voluntarily throw it all away was simply not within their operational calculus. They guarded against external infiltration and internal collapse from the bottom, not a voluntary precision strike from the very top of their own trusted ranks. The system watched the gates diligently, never imagining the keeper would himself dismantle the walls. September 6th began as a routine training day. Belenko's assigned mission was a standard navigation and intercept drill. This provided the perfect cover. He would be airborne with fuel, and his absence from base would not trigger immediate alarms. His planning faced 3 lethal hurdles: fuel, interception, and identification. The MiG-25's range was limited, especially at the low altitudes necessary to avoid radar. His target was Hakodate Airport on the northern Japanese island of Hokkaido, a civilian field long enough to handle a jet landing. He calculated a precise fuel profile, a high-altitude dash to the coast to conserve fuel, then a rapid descent to near wavetop level to vanish from Soviet radar. From there, it would be a tense, fuel-guzzling sprint southeast. The execution was a masterpiece of cold nerve. After takeoff, he followed his planned corridor briefly. Then he descended, leveling off at an altitude so low his wingtips nearly brushed the whitecaps of the Sea of Japan. In the cockpit, the world was a blur of grey water and instrument glow. The radar altimeter chirped a constant, urgent warning. In the command bunker at Chuguievka, his blip dissolved into the clutter of the ocean's surface. Standard procedure might assume a catastrophic crash, but Belenko knew the drill. They would wait, hoping for a reappearance. He had a small window of confusion to exploit. After roughly 30 minutes of terrifying low-level flight, Japanese radar at the Wakanai station picked up an unidentified, fast-moving contact. It was not on a commercial route. It was coming from the direction of the USSR. The JSDF scrambled 2 F-4EJ Phantoms from Chitose Air Base. Belenko, seeing the fighters, knew the next critical phase had begun. He could not dogfight. He could not outrun them at this low altitude without burning his remaining fuel in minutes. His only weapon was visual signaling. He rocked his wings, lowered his landing gear, the universal signs of a non-hostile intent. He then began a slow, careful climb, conserving energy, heading toward land. The Phantoms, wary of a trick, bracketed him closely. Their pilots reported a massive twin-tailed Soviet interceptor, behaving erratically but not aggressively. The tense formation crossed the coastline. Belenko, his fuel gauges dipping into the red, spotted Hakodate's runway. He was too high, too fast. He executed a series of steep energy-shedding turns, a dangerous maneuver for the heavy Foxbat. On final approach, he realized he was still coming in too hot. He slammed the aircraft onto the runway, blowing out several tires and skidding to a stop, his fuel tanks virtually dry. The mission, a staggering feat of aviation and psychological endurance, was over. He had navigated not just the physical gauntlet, but the procedural one, transitioning from a Soviet military asset to a defector in Allied airspace without being destroyed by either side. The MiG-25R, Blue 31, sat skewed across the southern end of Hakodate Airport's single runway, a monstrous alien artifact on the quiet tarmac. Its blown tires bled rubber. Steam hissed from overtaxed braking systems. The sharp, acrid smell of scorched metal and hydraulic fluid cut through the salt air. Inside the cockpit, Viktor Belenko, his flight suit soaked with sweat, executed the final steps of his plan. He popped the canopy but did not immediately exit. With deliberate, rehearsed movements, he removed the circuit breakers for the aircraft's self-destruct system, a charge in the radar unit meant to obliterate its core secrets if capture was imminent. He then discharged his survival pistol into the instrument panel, not in rage, but to destroy the critical IFF, identification friend or foe, transponder codes, a final act of denial to his former masters. Only then did he climb out, raising his hands to the circle of stunned Japanese airport police and ground self-defense force personnel who had surrounded the aircraft with weapons drawn. His first words in broken English were deliberate. "I am Lieutenant Belenko. I ask for asylum in the United States. Please block the aircraft." The scene was one of surreal disbelief. A crowd of civilians from a nearby observation deck began gathering, taking photographs of the bizarre bat-winged jet. Local police, utterly unprepared for a geopolitical earthquake on their runway, could only establish a crude cordon. The news travelled up the Japanese chain of command with electric speed. Within an hour, officials from the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs, MOEFA, and the Defense Agency were in panicked consultations. The American embassy in Tokyo was notified. It was early morning. The signal from the CIA station in Tokyo triggered a shockwave through the intelligence community. The impossible had happened. A MiG-25 intact was sitting on friendly soil. The initial priority was absolute: secure the pilot and secure the aircraft from any form of Soviet retrieval or sabotage. Meanwhile, across the Sea of Japan, the realization dawned with slow, dawning horror. At Chuguyevka, when Belenko failed to re-establish contact or reappear on radar, the initial assumption was a catastrophic mechanical failure and crash into the sea. Search and rescue helicopters and AN-12 transports were scrambled to the last known position over the Sea of Japan. But as the minutes ticked into an hour with no debris field, no emergency beacon, a colder suspicion began to form. Then intercepts of chaotic Japanese civilian radio broadcasts mentioning a large Soviet military aircraft landing at Hakodate filtered through KGB signals intelligence. A frantic, encrypted query was sent to the Soviet embassy in Tokyo. The ambassador's reply confirmed the nightmare. A MiG-25 from the Far Eastern military district was on Japanese soil. The pilot was alive and in custody. In Moscow, the news hit the desk of the Minister of Defense, Marshal Andrei Grechko, and the chairman of the KGB, Yuri Andropov, like a physical blow. The initial reaction was a combination of the incredulous rage and paralyzing fear. This was not just a loss. It was an unprecedented security catastrophe. Every secret housed in that airframe, its metallurgy, its radar frequencies, its engine tolerances, its electronic countermeasures, was now vulnerable. Andropov, a master of clandestine warfare, understood the implications immediately. The Foxbat was not just one aircraft. It was the linchpin of Soviet aerial defense strategy from the Kola Peninsula to Kamchatka. Its compromise would force the redesign of entire weapon systems, the retraining of PVO forces, and the abandonment of countless codes and frequencies. The Politburo would demand answers, and heads would roll. The only hope was to get the aircraft back before the Americans could dissect it. Thus began a frantic, multi-pronged Soviet response. Diplomatically, the USSR launched a furious offensive. Within hours of the landing, the Soviet embassy in Tokyo delivered a stern diplomatic note to the Japanese government. It claimed Belenko had become disoriented due to instrument failure and accidentally crossed into Japanese airspace. They demanded the immediate return of the aircraft and the pilot, framing it as a simple matter of rectifying a navigational error and respecting state sovereignty. They invoked international aviation law and hinted at grave consequences for Japan's relations with the USSR. Simultaneously, a disinformation campaign was initiated. TASS, the official news agency, released a brief, bizarre statement about a pilot lost in bad weather, a narrative so flimsy it only heightened Western suspicions. But diplomacy was the polite facade, and Andropov's KGB activated Line KR, counterintelligence, and Line S, illegals assets in Japan. Their mission was singular: infiltrate Hakodate Airport and either sabotage the MiG-25 or, if possible, arrange for its destruction. Japanese counterintelligence, warned by their American counterparts, would soon report suspicious activity around the airport perimeter. Unexplained attempts to bribe guards, mysterious individuals photographing the security cordon from distant hills. The Cold War's most valuable physical prize was now a static battleground. The true turning point, the moment of irreversible intelligence transfer, did not occur in the air over the Sea of Japan, but in the sealed hangar at Hyakuri Air Base north of Tokyo. The Japanese, after initial assessment at Hakodate, made a pivotal decision. Under intense American pressure and recognizing the colossal intelligence opportunity, they agreed to a covert transfer. A team of USAF technicians from the Foreign Technology Division (FTD) at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, already en route, joined Japanese Self-Defense Force engineers. Under the cover of night, the disabled Foxbat was partially disassembled, its wings removed, loaded onto heavy-duty trailers, and shrouded in tarps for a secretive road convoy to a more secure facility. Inside Hyakuri's hardened aircraft shelter, under blinding arc lights, the autopsy of a Soviet legend began. For the American and Japanese technical teams, it was a moment of profound revelation. Their first shock was the airframe. Expecting advanced titanium construction, Their tools met heavy, riveted nickel steel. The MiG-25 was not a lightweight superfighter. It was a flying tank, a testament to brute force engineering. This immediately explained its staggering weight and changed the fundamental Western understanding of its performance envelope and limitations. Next was the jewel, the RP-25 Smerch S radar. Carefully extracted from its bay, it was a revelation of a different kind. Instead of the expected cutting-edge solid-state systems, the Foxfire radar was a museum piece built with vacuum tubes. Reliable, resistant to electromagnetic pulse, but bulky, power-hungry, and with limited capabilities against low-flying targets, the myth of an invincible, all-seeing electronic eye evaporated. The associated fire control computer was similarly archaic. This single discovery had immediate and profound tactical implications. NATO electronic warfare units could now develop precise jamming protocols. Evasion tactics for penetrating aircraft could be radically revised. The engines, the massive R-15Bs, were examined. Their design confirmed they were incapable of sustained Mach 3 flight without catastrophic wear. The Soviet interceptor fleet's top speed was a short-dash capability, not a cruising speed. Every component, from the primitive cockpit layout to the wiring harnesses, was photographed, analysed and catalogued. Sample cuttings were taken for metallurgical analysis. The aircraft's fingerprints, its unique radar cross-section, infrared signature, and electronic emissions were measured in detail, data that would rewrite the software of every NATO air defense system and missile seeker head. Simultaneously, in a safe house near Tokyo, Viktor Belenko was undergoing a different kind of dissection. Debriefers from the CIA and DIA, joined by technical experts, worked around the clock. Belenko was not just a pilot, he was a walking encyclopedia of the PVO. For weeks he provided an exhaustive, systematic dump of information. He drew detailed schematics of his home base, outlined daily operational procedures, revealed call signs, radio frequencies, and encryption patterns. He described the training syllabus for MiG-25 pilots, their tactics for engaging SR-71s and B-52s, the performance limits they were warned not to exceed. He listed the locations of other Foxbat regiments, their alert states, and their standard armaments. He explained the labyrinth of political and security controls, giving the West an unparalleled blueprint of the human terrain within the Soviet military. His defection was not a single data point, it was the delivery of the entire operational manual of Soviet high-altitude air defense. The Soviet diplomatic and covert campaign reached a fever pitch but was ultimately thwarted. Japanese authorities, guided by the CIA's counterintelligence staff, tightened security at Hayakuri to an impregnable level. KGB sabotage attempts were identified and neutralized. The diplomatic pressure was immense, with Moscow threatening economic sanctions and geopolitical repercussions. Japan, caught between two superpowers, sought a face-saving compromise. They agreed to return the aircraft, but only after a thorough extended inspection to ensure it had no weapons aboard, as stipulated by Japan's post-war constitution. This legalistic fig leaf provided the Americans with the precious weeks they needed. Finally, in mid-November 1976, the dismantled MiG-25 was crated and loaded onto a Soviet freighter at the port of Hitachi. Soviet engineers, under the watchful eyes of Japanese and American observers, reassembled it with grim-faced fury. But they were receiving a hollow shell. Every secret had been harvested. The components were now known quantities. The returned Foxbat was a spent cartridge. For Belenko, the climax was a personal resolution. After extensive debriefing, he was secretly flown to the United States under a CIA-administered false identity. His request for asylum was granted. The man who had traded a steel titan for his freedom disappeared into the American protective custody system, his knowledge continuing to reshape Western defense strategy for years to come. The Soviet Union had lost its most secret aircraft. But more devastatingly, it had lost the myth of its invincibility and the trust in the very system built to ensure loyalty. The shockwave from that September landing would ripple through Soviet design bureaus, intelligence agencies, and political halls for a decade. The return of the crated MiG-25 to the Soviet Union in November 1976 did not end the crisis. It merely closed the first, most humiliating chapter. The true aftermath was a protracted season of reckoning, restructuring, and paranoia within the USSR, and a fundamental recalibration of power in the skies by the West. Within the Soviet military-industrial complex, the reaction was one of systemic panic. The MiG-25 had been compromised at every level. Overnight, an entire generation of air defense strategy, built around the Foxbat's perceived invincibility, was rendered obsolete. The immediate operational consequences were severe. PVO regiments flying the MiG-25 were forced to stand down for urgent modifications. Their IFF, Identification Friend or Foe codes, now fully known to NATO, had to be completely changed across the entire Soviet air defense network, a cryptographic nightmare of staggering scale. Radar frequencies were shifted, tactical procedures hastily rewritten, and pilots retrained to compensate for the now exposed limitations of their aircraft. The mere knowledge that NATO understood the Foxbat's true flight envelope and radar capabilities meant every patrol, every intercept profile was now conducted under a presumed disadvantage. The technological fallout was even more costly and humiliating. The MiG-25's successor, the more advanced MiG-31, was in late stages of development. Its entire design philosophy, meant to correct the Foxbat's flaws while retaining its strengths, was now based on compromised assumptions. Key systems, particularly its advanced Zaslon phased array radar, had to be hurriedly re-evaluated and likely redesigned to counter the specific vulnerabilities Belenko had exposed. The financial and temporal costs set the program back by years. Every piece of Soviet aerospace technology was now viewed through the lens of potential Western foreknowledge. A climate of corrosive suspicion infected the design bureaus of Mikoyan, Sukhoi, and Tupolev. The purge was inevitable and brutal. The KGB, under Andropov, launched a sweeping investigation. Its focus was not just on negligence, but on the ideological rot that allowed a model officer to defect. The commander of the 530th Fighter Aviation Regiment, the head of base security, the unit's Zampolit, and numerous other officers were summarily dismissed, demoted, or sent to remote postings. The net spread wider. Throughout the PVO and VVS, personnel files were re-examined. Pilots with any hint of foreign contacts, intellectual curiosity, or personal dissatisfaction were grounded or transferred to non-flying duties. The system's response was to tighten the screws of control to excruciating levels, further stifling initiative and morale. Trust, the already scarce commodity, evaporated. Aviators now lived under the constant shadow of suspicion from their own security apparatus, devastating blow to the esprit de corps of an elite force. For the United States and its allies, the aftermath was a period of exhilarating, almost overwhelming intelligence synthesis. The data from the Hyakuri teardown and Belenko's debriefings were codified into thousands of pages of technical reports and tactical assessments. The DIA's Defense Intelligence Report on the MiG-25 became a Bible for Western air forces. The most immediate impact was on the design and tactics of the new generation of American fighters. The F-15 Eagle, which had been designed under the shadow of the exaggerated Foxbat myth, was now confirmed to be decisively superior in almost every respect. More importantly, the US now possessed the exact electronic signatures of the MiG-25's radar and guidance systems. This data was fed directly into the development programs for next-generation weapons like the AM-120 AMRAAM missile and into the electronic warfare suites of aircraft like the F-16 and the EF-111 Raven, allowing them to be fine-tuned for precise countermeasures. Strategically, the balance of power in the high-altitude duel shifted decisively. The SR-71 Blackbird program received a new lease on life. With the Foxbat's interception profile fully understood, the Blackbird's flight paths and electronic countermeasure programs could be optimized to exploit its weaknesses with even greater confidence. The psychological aura of Soviet air defense, a crucial element of deterrence, had been punctured. NATO planners could now wargame scenarios with factual data, not fearful speculation. The Belenko defection provided a confidence boost that resonated through the entire Western intelligence community, proving that even the most hardened Soviet systems were vulnerable to human factors. The long-term ripples of the defection extended far beyond tactics and technology, striking at the geopolitical and ideological core of the Cold War. For the Soviet leadership, the event was a profound and enduring humiliation that exposed a critical vulnerability, the human element. No amount of steel, no sophistication of engineering could compensate for a loss of faith. The Politburo was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. Their system, for all its control, could produce individuals who would actively choose its enemies. This fueled a deepening paranoia within the nomenklatura. Andropov used the incident to argue for even greater KGB powers and resources to monitor the population, particularly the military and technical intelligentsia. The defection became a cautionary tale cited in internal party memos for years, a symbol of the ideological decay that required constant vigilance. It contributed to a more brittle, defensive Soviet posture in the late 1970s, one that viewed internal dissent and Western outreach with even more violent suspicion. Globally, the incident delivered a massive propaganda coup to the West. While not explicitly crowed about in public to protect sources and methods, the underlying message was clear. The Soviet monolith was penetrable. Its citizens, even its most honoured, were voting with their feet. For the dissident movements within the Eastern Bloc, Belenko's successful escape served as a potent, if unrepeatable, symbol of defiance. It also irrevocably damaged Soviet-Japanese relations. Moscow viewed Tokyo's cooperation with the American intelligence operation as a profound betrayal, despite the eventual return of the airframe. Diplomatic ties remained frosty for years, and Soviet military overflights and naval incursions around Japanese territory increased in frequency and aggression, a form of perpetual retaliation. The fate of the machine and the man followed divergent paths. The repatriated MiG-25 Blue 31 was never returned to active service. It became a pariah, a walking security breach. After being meticulously examined by Soviet counterintelligence to assess exactly what the Americans had learned, it was likely stripped for usable parts and its airframe scrapped or relegated to a static training role far from any front line. The Foxbat fleet as a whole was rapidly downgraded in NATO threat assessments. While still a fast, high-altitude threat, it was no longer an object of mystery and dread, but a known quantity with defined counters. Its operational value plummeted overnight. Viktor Belenko, granted US citizenship and a new identity, embarked on a second life. He was not paraded publicly. His value was in his knowledge, not his persona. He worked as an aeronautical consultant and lecturer for the US military and intelligence community for decades, his insights continuing to inform Western understanding of Soviet technology and psychology. His defection was the ultimate life gamble, and he lived with its consequences: the permanent separation from his family in the USSR, the constant shadow of potential KGB reprisal, the weight of being a historical pivot point. He became the most prominent in a line of asset defectors, proving that in the intelligence war, a single motivated human being could be worth more than a fleet of satellites. For the MiG-25 itself, the defection marked the end of an era of myth. It continued to serve in the Soviet and later Russian Air Force, and was exported to several allied nations like Syria, Iraq, and Algeria. In these hands it would see combat, but never again under a shroud of invincibility. It was a capable interceptor, but a known entity. The legend of the Foxbat was permanently demystified on that Hackadate runway. The aircraft that remained in service was a tool, not a terror. The final ironic twist in the aftermath was the strategic miscalculation it revealed on both sides. The Soviets had overestimated the loyalty enforced by their system. The Americans had overestimated the technological sophistication of their rival. Both superpowers were forced to re-evaluate their core assumptions. The Cold War continued, but it continued with one of its most dangerous illusions: the myth of the perfect Soviet machine shattered forever. The true cost to the USSR was not measured in rubles spent on new radars, but in the lost confidence that its walls were truly sealed. The story of Viktor Belenko and the MiG-25 endures not merely as a thrilling tale of escape, but as a profound parable of the Cold War. It encapsulates the core contradictions of that decades-long struggle. A clash of titanic, impersonal systems decided, in the end, by the will of a single individual. On one level, it is the ultimate triumph of human agency over mechanized control. The Soviet state had invested everything in the machine: the steel, the radar, the engines, the layered security. It saw the pilot as a component, a reliable biological processor fitted into the cockpit. Belenko proved that component could think, could feel, could reject its programming. His defection was a monumental act of cognitive liberty. He did not destroy the Foxbat with missiles. He defeated it by understanding it, and then using that understanding as a key to unlock his own cage. In doing so, he demonstrated that the most critical vulnerability in any fortress is not in its walls, but in the minds of those entrusted to guard them. Technologically, the event marked a watershed in intelligence warfare. It was the moment when signals intelligence, SIGINT, and imagery intelligence, IMINT, were dramatically complemented by the most priceless commodity of all, material intelligence, MATINT. No amount of radar blip analysis or satellite photography could reveal the feel of the steel, the smell of the wiring, the precise heft of a vacuum tube in a radar set. Belenko delivered the artifact itself, and in the process, he validated a timeless truth. To know a thing, you must hold it in your hands. The painstaking physical dissection at Hyakuri set a new standard for technical espionage, a standard that would later fuel Western efforts to acquire other Soviet systems like the T-72 tank or the Mi-24 helicopter. For the Soviet Union, the legacy was a deepening epistemological crisis. The incident fostered a corrosive internal paranoia that accelerated the system's inward turn. If a top PVO officer could break faith, who could be trusted? The response, more control, more suspicion, more ideological rigidity, weakened the very institution it sought to protect. It highlighted the growing dissonance between the state's utopian claims and the lived experience of its most capable citizens. The Foxbat was meant to be a shield against external threats. Its loss revealed a fatal internal flaw. Today, the MiG-25 sits in museums, a relic of a bygone arms race. Viktor Belenko lives in anonymity, a man who swapped one history for another. But the echoes of that September flight linger. It reminds us that in the grand, abstract narratives of geopolitics and technological rivalry, the human element remains the ultimate variable, unpredictable, decisive, and capable of redirecting the course of history with a single calculated turn of the controls. The most secret machine in the Soviet arsenal was not stolen by a spy or captured in battle. It was delivered by a pilot who, in choosing freedom, forever altered the balance of the skies, proving that even in the age of machines, history is still written by individuals.